So Shiv, you might have remembered from the last episode, we were talking about like solving a problem, a very complex problem, which was like in regards for you, is like your health. And I mentioned like a mental model called first principles. I'm not sure if that rang a bell.
I think I've heard you sort of talk about it at times, and you've aligned that to some very well-known people that use it. So, yeah, I'm keen to hear it. I've heard you mention it, but I actually don't know the in depths of it. So it'd be interesting to know that or learn that, I guess.
Yeah, sure. First principles is like looking at the world from like the lens of a physicist. Now you're thinking like, what does that really mean? It means basically breaking things down to an atomic level. And when you break things down to an atomic level, you actually see the actual fundamental truth of that, what that is. And Elon Musk, especially Charlie Munger, they would use this a lot, like this mental model. Actually, all entrepreneurs, even engineers, use this a lot. And I mean, they've accumulated billions over their lifetime. So it's probably worth looking into why this mental model is very important. So Elon Musk, the way he used it was people were complaining about like battery packs. It's like, buying battery packs off the market. So it would cost like $600, but he used this mental model to break it down. And what he did was like he broke down the like what are the materials that are going to be used. Can you purchase this at like an exchange, and can you purchase it for like a low price? And and then he's like talking about the manufacturing process, how you can reduce cost there. So if you create your own battery pack, he found that it would reduce the price by 90%.
If Tesla produces them themselves.
Yeah, and
Right.
he was able to do that basically. It was with like regards to battery packs for SpaceX. So
Wow.
so he reduced the cost by 90%, but he's using this first principles mental model to break down like, like what are the materials we need? What's the manufacturing process? Can we develop relationships with like suppliers and all these types of things? And then by identifying each of the elements that is involved in creating a battery pack, is able to reduce the cost by 90%, which is quite significant when you think about it that way.
Yeah, from business terms, that's very significant. But that's interesting. Like he's faced with a problem, he's able to break it down and then save 90% and be known to create his own battery packs. That's quite fascinating, to be honest. But how does that say something about the person's like where that comes from? So what I mean is like, does it indicate their childhood? Does it indicate how they were raised? Does it indicate other issues that they might have? Of being someone that's so focused on finding the core, does that stem from something? Or
Well, if you think about yourself as a child, think about the number of questions you'd ask to your parents. Like, oh, why do we have to go to sleep? Or like, why do we have to brush our teeth? And then sometimes I think the parents would be like, oh, I can't be bothered to answer this. So I'll just give them like a ridiculous sounding question, which like an answer that would just stop all the questioning. And when you might have remembered, like, I remember my mom would say, oh, the reason we have to brush our teeth is because if you eat something at night and you don't brush your teeth, there's going to be like ants and stuff growing in your stomach, like insects. And so that would stop you from like questioning and just doing the, like, brushing your teeth, basically. And then the tooth fairy stories, Santa Claus stories, all those types of stories to like, I think it just, so that they don't have to answer as many questions. They'd always come up with something mythical.
a reasoning that's absurd. So then you go to further, as you grow up, you further question that. And you actually try to find the core reason as to why they gave you that answer. Yeah. There's a few things that have happened to me that like, I know my parents like absolutely lied to me about. And I think when you grow up and then you put two and two together, you're like, oh, okay, that's what's up. That's so it's looking at the lens of a physicist, but really breaking it down to the molecular level. Actually, like you want to get to the point where it's just like that one answer or that one thing that really drives what you are, what you're trying to change, or what it is that you're trying to solve.
Yes, it could be in that aspect as well,
Right.
but it can also be for learning. And like an example that I could give is like, what is the difference between a cook and a chef? Do you know like what the difference is? Or
Cook and a chef,
well,
aren't they the same thing?
yeah, that's what you'd think, but there's a
Sorry.
huge difference actually, because
Right.
a cook is someone who just follows recipes and memorizes them. Like they're able to follow recipes and know how to use tools. But a chef is someone who can create recipes, is a creator of recipes, because they understand each of the individual ingredients, how it works together, and like the flavors, the texture, how to enhance each of them. That's why even with like 3 or 4 ingredients, they can create some amazing dish, spectacular dish. Whereas if you ask a cook to do that, they'll probably struggle. They would have to look at internet, online, and then get a reference, probably from ChatGPT or something. Create a dish out of these 3 ingredients, whereas a chef can just create it on the instance. It'll probably be better than what a AI can give because they understand the principles behind the cooking. There's more towards just like getting stuff together and just creating a dish. It's like there's the ingredients, how do you enhance each other's flavors, textures, and things like that. There's like the cooking method, there's like the preparation. There's so much to it, but they understand each of the core principle behind that cooking. So and I think that is the difference between someone who just rote learns, which was majority of us in school, versus someone who's adaptive, who can adapt to the environment when the situation's changed. So that's like an example I can think of to really bring out the difference between understanding first principles versus someone who just memorizes things.
It kind of speaks volumes because in this day and age, you need to be someone that's adaptive and someone that learns quick. Some people are slow, like they have a different learning method, so they're a little slower in learning. But generally, you'd have to try to be as adaptive as possible in any situation to actually pick something up very quickly. Now, I mean, there's other things that hinder people from doing that, but the ability to learn something quickly and absorb it without rote learning, but actually understanding what you're trying to do or what the problem is a lot more helpful. You're right. I think from high school, it's all rote learning, right? Textbook, chapter 6.3, you memorize. So example, Germany invades Poland 1939, September 1st, right? That's rote learning. That's a date. You know why. But then if you go behind as to what led up to that, it's like, the Great Depression, Hitler tries to seize power, Nazis get power in 1933, the policy of appeasement by the Allies. So, Hitler's starting to slowly expand his influence over Europe over a 6-year period. Goes over Czechoslovakia first and other few countries. Allied powers are like, man, Hitler, you got to stop doing this, dude. And he's like, yeah, sure. I'll sign a piece of paper to say I won't do it. And then next thing you know, September 1st, 1939, and I hope I'm getting the date right, is when he invades Poland. So it's actually when you understand that at an atomic level, that these were all the things that led to that one date, it also helps you understand that better. And if you think about from an exam perspective, what year did Poland, or what was the date Germany invaded Poland? You'd have 4 to think, but you can actually then reason as to, this was everything that led up to this moment, and it was this date. So that's just one analogy that I could think of, but it makes sense. I think from experience at work and other places, it's the quick learning and just trying to understand the problem from it at a very atomic, at an atomic level, very, very minor level, and then allowing it to tell a story. And then you being able to relay that story back to someone is just as helpful, because then you've consolidated your learning, you've summarized your learning in a way that's practical.
Yeah, I definitely agree that that's the best way to absorb information, learn, and being able to, in a storytelling approach, I think is like the most effective way to communicate like the problem, especially. That's why you see it a lot in a lot of businesses when they try and explain like the problem. It's not like it's more of like a storytelling approach, more easier for people to understand and absorb. And I think they also break it down, like the problem at obviously like atomic level. They focus on the specific niche and things like that.
It's interesting you say that, because I feel like humans actually enjoy stories. I mean, if we see fiction books, for example, the storytelling aspect of, just the basics of what makes a story, conflict, different genres, different ideas, different themes being explored. But then if you sort of look at, have you heard of that YouTuber, Mr. B. Allen or Mr. Bolin? People call him Mr. Bolin B. Allen. But he tells like horror stories on YouTube, and he tells stories of, like, you know, some of our real life Reddit stories, for example. You get from Reddit some actual horror stories. You know, people have seen shadow figures, or, you know, they were stuck on the highway and they were approached by men or women, whatever it was. But he's actually such a great storyteller, and he actually, you know, and he's really well known on YouTube. He's got over like 9 million subscribers, I think. But
Wow.
storytelling, and I think if you go back to, if you look at it from an evolution perspective or a historical perspective, what would we do as like cavemen, or what would our ancestors do if they sat around? They share stories, right? Because sharing the experiences, or sharing the wild dreams of someone, or sharing a wild imagination of someone, it brings a very
It brings like the community
yeah,
together, I
and it
guess,
brings a
this
vision.
community.
And so I think with like first principles, for me personally, I would say, is knowing that at an atomic level, but being able to convey that in a story to your audience is just as helpful.
Yeah, and I think to know even at an atomic level, you'd also have to understand obviously the problem, but also be able to articulate it very well. So that means you have to have a very in-depth understanding of the problem you're trying to solve, or what you're trying to communicate across. And
who are some other people that have actually used this?
yeah, I was going to actually mention that. It's
Right.
funny you brought it up. So there is another person, maybe you may not know, but if it rings a bell, Josh Waitzkin. I see you nodding, so you probably do remember, probably you don't.
No, I've never heard of him.
So
It's
he's like,
sad.
yeah, well,
Sorry.
he's a former chess player. He's a martial art world champion and an author. So this guy can kick your ass, beat you in chess, and also write a book about how he just destroyed you. So when he was a child, he was like known as like a prodigy. And he won the US Junior Chess Championship in 1993, 1994. And I checked like his latest rating for chess rating is like 2,464. And so anyone's chess rating that is above 2,000 is just considered a genius. And I think that was in 2022. So I'm not sure how old he is now, but I'm pretty sure I think he's in his mid 50s. Maybe you can fact check that. But that's quite impressive. For someone at that age to have that high of chess rating is really impressive, because usually your chess rating, it depletes, like it reduces as you age, because your memory and stuff isn't as well as before. So now you're just thinking, okay, how did this guy use first principles, right? Well, he explains how he started his chess journey, and he first started by studying the basic elements of the skill. So what he did was in chess was he was studying situations to demonstrate the core capabilities of each of the piece. Because all of us, I think even myself and stuff, we're very quick to just memorize strategies. Like, oh, let me just watch some YouTube clips, read some books, and memorize strategies. But what he did was he put himself in the situation. So, for example, king, pawn versus king, right? In this scenario, your objective is to trap the king with your king and pawn. So what he did, instead of just memorizing strategies and stuff, was he tried and understood what is the strength and weaknesses of each of the pieces in that scenario. So then you build a relationship like of how these pieces can work together to be able to achieve the objective. So remember how we talked about circle of competence? This is where that can come in as well, where it's like you're looking at also the strengths and weaknesses of each of the pieces. Because the pawn piece, say I don't know if you play chess, but the pawn piece at the beginning is probably the weakest piece, but at the end it's the most valuable, because you can recover all your old pieces as well when it gets to the other side. So ironically, it becomes the most valuable piece as you get closer towards the end of the game. So just understanding like each of the pieces and what their fundamentals are, why, how you can navigate in different scenarios and situations, leveraging their strengths, is how he would study. And by practicing these types of situations diligently, he learned the limitations, the strengths of each of the piece, and he was able to interact and maneuver around complicated situations. And once you understand this type of principle, you can move into like any situation, because you understand the pieces and the strengths. So then he explains on how he used these underlying principles, and it gave him a much more deeper understanding of chess strategy rather than someone who just memorizes things. So, because when someone who memorizes strategies, there's so many conditions that have to be true for that strategy to work. But what happens when one of the conditions are not met? You're sort of falling apart. And then you have also emotions and other things that mess up your decision making. So if you understand everything fundamentally, then you're more adaptive. And remember how we talked about the map is not the territory? So in this case, if someone just memorizes models, memorizes strategies in this case, which is the map or the model, what happens when the terrain is different? They can't maneuver around the terrain. And when you're someone who's adaptive, who understands the principles of what you're studying, whatever you're doing, or in this case playing chess, of each of the pieces, you even if the map changes, or the terrain changes, you know different models, it's different strategies and how to apply it because you know its strengths and weaknesses. So basically by studying the fundamentals and principles as he did, you can see what's beneath the surface and be able to adapt to any situation and environment.
So that's a really good example. So in this case, he's sort of a very strategy based view on chess, and I don't play chess, but I really should. But he saw each piece as its own role and responsibility, strengths and weaknesses. And by doing that for each piece, he understands what that piece brings and how that piece relates to the other. And then he sort of created his own strategies based on that and how to use it. And if things were not, if the conditions of those, like let's say the other player makes a different move in that instance, he still has the ability to get out of it because he knows it at the atomic level of what that piece is actually meant to do. That's exactly right.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Because he knows exactly what this. I would say what are the strengths of the piece and when it's probably strong in situations and how to navigate around the situations using the strengths of each of the pieces.
That's very interesting. It's just amazing how when you start breaking things down at a granular level, the things it starts exposing. It's like peeling an onion. You peach layer by layer by layer, and then you actually get to the core, the middle bit of it. And it's, it doesn't tell you something big, but it kind of tells you that it's holding all those layers together.
That's a beautiful analogy.
Right?
Yeah.
So you've got an onion, you start peeling it, in the middle, it's holding it all together. And as you start stripping each layer, you start to understand what holds it together. And when you start to understand what holds it together, there's your first principle. That's
probably one of the best analogies to like remember what first principles really is. Yeah.
An onion layer. Remember that, guys.
But now I think the bigger question now is like, how do you apply this way of thinking? Like, how do you get to first principles?